My name is Christopher Armitage. I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington's 5th Congressional District. If elected, I'll be the youngest sitting member of the House of Representatives. I'm 28 years old. I did 7 years in the Air Force, deployed to the Middle East twice on non-combat deployments as security forces and a base defense operations controller. I did presidential security for Barack Obama during his trip to Argentina, where I led a small security team that worked with transnational forces to include Argentinian special forces. I have a master's of science in Homeland Security that I earned while active duty Air Force as a staff sergeant. I left the Air Force to pursue stand-up comedy full-time. I'd always been doing it as a hobby, and I decided I wanted to just be done with 911 calls and domestic violence calls and even, the Homeland Security stuff. I just wanted to tell jokes for a living. But I stepped into this race over a year ago because I don't trust that we're going to I'm going to have someone to vote for who is ready to fight for what we really need, who isn't going to use our futures as a bargaining chip. Something like healthcare isn't supposed to be a political bargaining chip. We have people dying every single year. Being at war for almost my entire lifetime is not something that we should be supporting. And these, a lot of conservatives are, it's abortion and guns decide their votes. And you know what? That makes them a cohesive voting bloc. We need people who are like that for healthcare. And there's crossover too. I've met people. I've been to 25 towns across this congressional district. The district is 25% bigger than New Jersey, 25% bigger than that whole state. I've been to 25 towns here, and I've met people who say, don't take my guns. I want universal health care, though. And that, those conversations are what break down those barriers where we stop seeing other people as Republicans or Democrats or Libertarians or Green Party first. We start seeing them as Americans first, as members of our community first. And that's my political philosophy.
And it's such a missed opportunity on the Democratic side, at least, because, there is this huge population of working people across the country that would absolutely vote for any ticket that would guarantee them health care, just because people are hurting. People need universal health care. And the fact that the Democrats aren't leading the charge on that and, are kind of putting forward this diluted message, people understand when they say expanded access to health care. They know that doesn't mean their lives are going to improve in a serious way or that they're actually going to get affordable health care. So, I love that you're bringing that to the table. And, it's not just a bargaining chip. It's a serious platform that the left needs to embrace if they're serious about courting the rural vote and the working class vote.
Centrism is a myth. It's not a real thing. Your feelings about guns don't have anything to do with your feelings on taxes, don't have anything to do with your feelings on war, don't have anything to do with your feelings on healthcare. There isn't. And that's what I realized over the last few years, doing comedy in a lot of different communities, being in the military and serving side by side with people who come from very diverse backgrounds. People will say, this is everything Republicans feel. Why do they all line up? And it's like, do you just feel the opposite of them on everything? What makes you any different? Think for yourself on every single issue. I think I'm a lot better on guns than my opponent because my opponent doesn't actually have sincerely held beliefs on guns. I've carried guns. I have a concealed carry permit. And to me, that's one issue. They call me left. I want universal single-payer health care. I want universal mental health care. I want a living wage. I want climate action. I'm also not interested in going after people's guns, particularly marginalized and impacted communities, which I think right now more people than ever are realizing that they arming themselves, taking their security into their own hands is something they feel like they need to do because they don't trust the police to be able to do that. And
we wanted to talk to you about that. Obviously, you've been really molded by your career in law enforcement and in the armed forces. So you were a first responder as well as a member of the Air Force. And as a veteran, what is your reaction to the use of militarized forces upon the protesters that are kind of popping up all across the cities in the wake of the murder of George Floyd?
Well, it's the way law enforcement's behaving is a tremendous infringement on our constitutional rights. I wish people fought for every other constitutional amendment as hard as they fight for the Second Amendment. Because the fact is, when you kill someone, as a law enforcement officer, particularly someone who doesn't have a gun, doesn't have a knife, they're not coming at you, whatever, you have, even if they are doing those things, you have become their judge, jury, and executioner. We are guaranteed, it's codified in our founding documents, you're supposed to be able to have a trial by your peers. You're supposed to have your day in court, no matter what you're accused of, innocent until proven guilty. You're supposed to have a right to privacy. When our founders said that they wanted to protect people, they wrote it in our founding document that you have a right to protection from unwarranted searches and seizures. Think about the terminology, unwarranted. They need a reason, not just a physical document called a warrant, a warranted reason. They need a reason to invade your privacy, your space, your business, your property. And so to me, decriminalizing sex work, decriminalizing drugs, making sure that we respect people's individual rights. I find people all over the political spectrum who agree with these things. And so clearly the political dichotomy as it exists is completely useless when it comes to being on the ground with the people.
Yeah. And that's especially pertinent in your district, which is a pretty red district from what I'm aware. Since 2005, a Republican, Kathy McMorris Rogers, has occupied the seat you're running for. Can you tell us anything about your opponent and what else you would bring to the community that she's not? Yeah,
well, Kathy has been in elected political offices since I was 2 years old. Before that, she worked for a politician, and her father was a chair of a local Republican Party group for a county Republican group. She was raised for this. She believes in criminalizing abortion. She doesn't think a person has jurisdiction over their bodies. That's the way I view it. And so, she wants to overturn Roe v. Wade. We got to bring this fight on every front. And speaking to the progressive community, and I'm not really a big fan of the label anymore, just because I've realized that there's so much more to the political spectrum, and labeling ourselves limits us so much. But they're useful. Labels also have uses, and I'm not putting them down. It's just a personal choice I've made. But speaking to the progressive community, we have so much ground that people can make with similar overlapping issues that we care about. I've got support from the Washington State Progressive Party and from the Washington State Libertarian Party, because there are policies that you're only going to get in those lanes because they're non-authoritarian. As long as the Democratic Party refuses to invest in rural communities, blue-collar communities, they're not going to grow. It's just not going to happen. You got to speak to people. You got to keep fighting on every front. I think of it in the military sense pretty often. That's just framing I use. But when this seat was held by a Democrat from 1964 to 1994, he was a Speaker of the House. And he lost his seat in the 1994 Republican wave election. He lost it because Republicans fought every single seat. It's like Speaker Pelosi, a little bit different since they're, deeper blue, but you don't make you Speaker of the House unless they think your district is safe for that party. You got to fight every front. And also it's about shining a light on cockroaches. It's shining a light on despicable behavior that kills people. We have the moral high ground. Let's own it.
Have you received any kind of help from the Democratic Party, the DCCC? Have they invested any resources into your race?
No. Locally, the county Democrats have been great. We have endorsements from the Spokane County Democrats, the Walla Walla County Democrats, the Pend Oreille County Democrats, 4th and 6th Legislative District Democrats. They're great. I love them on the ground. Nothing from above. I'm an independent voice. I'm open to sitting at the table with anybody. But also we just haven't raised enough money for them to pay attention to us. We've raised about $100,000. If we raise 100 to 200,000 this month, they might come around. And that's the inside scoop, by the way. That's how it works. There's a lot of organizations. They purely determine candidates' viability by fundraising. And it's hard to decide other metrics. So, what else do you got to go on? And we're getting there with our fundraising. We're moving in that direction. But I think it ignores strong candidates because there's more to it than money. I think the Democratic Party picks their candidates generally based on who paid their dues, and the Republican Party picks their candidates based off of who's good at earning votes. And that's the game we're playing here. If we don't win, people die. That's what our policies stand. That's what our policies mean. So we got to win elections. What's going to give us the best strategic advantage?
Yeah, just to kind of expel on that, one of the kind of prevailing narratives that you'll hear is how polarized we are in this country, how the Republicans and Democrats don't have anything in common, which just seems pretty untrue, right? If you kind of break out of that spell, you talk to people, I think of my dad who's voted Republican probably his whole life, right? But, he's outraged about the police brutality right now, that he could be sold on the case for Medicare for all, right? But he, like you said, he wants to, keep his gun, with him. So I wonder, what bridges would you build if you were to arrive at Congress, and how would you kind of break up this idea that if you're not purely with us, you're purely against us?
Campaign finance reforms to start, because I think that's when you can really start having good faith, substantive disagreements versus disagreements that are fueled by who's lining your pockets. That's a pretty big part of it. Who knows if the day will, I will work with anybody who is, the things we're working on together benefit the American public. Getting things passed that are going to benefit Eastern Washington and America and the world. I think, the Republican Party, as soon as Barack Obama was elected, Mitch McConnell said they were going to do everything they could to make him a first-term president. Even when Donald Trump was elected, there was still talk about, let's see what we can do to work with him. I don't know if I'm going to be able to heal. I'm not going to make promises that are unrealistic to make. I'm going to go there. I'm going to sit down at the table with people. I think, just being able to make people feel heard and respected goes a long way. And then shaming people. I am probably going to shame members of Congress who just sell out the American public. If you're a hack, a corrupt hack, I'll call you that to your face, because that's what we need as a nation. That's what.
Good, yeah.
I'm an Eagle Scout, and whether it was the Boy Scouts or when it was, serving, or even in comedy, you got to call out BS when you see it, or the whole team goes down. That's it. We lose when we can't figure out a way to work together, but that doesn't mean you follow through with a bad plan. That means you have the hard conversations, you call people out, and you're not afraid of looking mean.
Yeah, that's so essential right now, especially as, both parties' leaderships have totally dropped the ball when it comes to the handling of the coronavirus. And now that we're seeing both party leaderships have a totally kind of underwhelming milquetoast response to what's going on with the president's actions regarding the protests right now. It seems like both players on both teams are afraid to call out their own team. And what you're talking about is, I think, really essential to building a stronger left movement in this country, and that, holding our own accountable, calling out corruption where we see it. And I think that in and of itself is a kind of what you would be bringing to Congress, as opposed to your opponent, who clearly is not holding the members of her team accountable in this dire moment.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what people are seeing. And that doesn't mean there aren't degrees. I think more Democrats were critical of President Obama during his time than Republicans, if you did the math on it. And gosh, it's so frustrating to see people. My opponent is objectively more authoritarian than probably any Democrat. But people get a lot more caught up in the Dem versus Dem races without realizing, and it's not about Republican and Democrat. Justin Amash, I donated to Justin Amash, Representative Amash, after he was willing to stand up and speak his voice. He was one of the founders of the Liberty Caucus, but I think he really believes what he's saying, and that's someone you can work with. And so it's bigger than party, but look at people where people actually are on the issues, and get involved. My opponent takes $5 million a cycle, $5 million every cycle. It's not coming from in this district. The last census had our district at 10% unemployment. The last census had our district at 1/3 of the people under the poverty line. My opponent gets $5 million every 2 years from corporations that can trust them to be a rubber stamp. So we got to do what we can, whether it's volunteering, whether it's donating, whether it's just talking about it with other people on social media, to fight back.
Totally.
Yeah, and one of your campaign ads, you spoke about the benefits you received as a veteran, like paid education and healthcare. What can you say in favor of a robust social safety net, and why you believe all Americans are deserving of it?
That's one of my core beliefs. I saw it in the military is we had universal single payer healthcare. That's what the military has. It's millions of service members and their families have on-base clinics and hospitals where there is no billing. The doctors don't make more if they see more patients. You're not cycled in as quick as you can so they can make enough money. And I'm not calling it the doctor's greed. They have a lot of overhead too. But in the military, they weren't writing explanations to send to an insurance company for the insurance company to decide if the doctor is correct in their assessment that something is needed. They just, if you need an x-ray, they just say, go to the third floor, get an x-ray. So I've seen universal single payer in America work for millions of Americans. There's no reason we should be the only first world country where children die from insulin rationing. There's no reason that people have to raise money because their father needs a kidney transplant. That's not the standard. We're the only ones who have this problem in all of the developed nations on earth, and even some less developed nations. Now, living wage, that's just being pro-family. I don't want parents working 4 jobs and not being able to spend time with their kids. They're raising the next generation. I want to make sure people are able to have quality education, quality family time. I think that's important for development and also personal time. I want an America where everyone's able to have a savings account. If you have a job, you're working full time, you should be able to take care of yourself no matter what you're doing. And so the military community benefited from these things. And beyond just universal public university tuition, by the way, or tuition-free public universities, I also want to see tuition-free tradesman programs. I really want to see, if you want to enter a trade, you can go get the education for free from a union. Once you graduate, you can get a little bonus, and that's what the military did. And I think as a society, the average tradesman in this country is 58 years old. Why are we investing in our future as a country? Hopefully that answers it. I'm soapboxing pretty hard. Yeah, I'm amped. I've been doing phone calls all day. So
you talk about universal programs and stuff a lot, and something you propose on your website is a green jobs guarantee. Would you also support like an expanded social security program or a universal basic income, something to get that money into people's wallets that need it?
Yes, I'm proud to support expanded social security or a UBI. I think it's a really exciting possibility because one of the greatest conservative complaints is if you just give people money, they're not going to want to work. Well, I mean, if some people make less money working a job and sending their kids to daycare than they do if they're just on unemployment. That's not a problem of unemployment. I don't think it's my place to say who should and shouldn't have food,
right?
Particularly when children are involved.
Yeah.
I think that's legislating morality. To try and say, we got to figure out how to make people work, so they better just work or starve. No, congrats on being an American. You don't have to starve. You get a roof over your head.
Yeah, you could almost call it like state-sponsored violence if you think about it, that the fact that the money exists, our taxpayer money exists for a program like that, yet thousands of families are literally starving or, failing to pay their bills because they don't have enough money. And the fact that it is allowed to go on is outrageous.
Yeah, well, that's why I support UBI, because I think it's a great way if people. It's not means tested. I think means testing degrades the effectiveness of a lot of really well-intentioned programs. Some of these programs, 2/3 of their costs are administrative because they want to give you $1,000 drug test to get $250 worth of services or aid. And it's pragmatism. It's just doing the math. Oh, I did the Yang thing, Matt. By the way, I'm not getting involved in the presidential race. I've done everything I can to avoid it. All politics is local, and that's my mindset.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Talking about expanding social safety nets, the cost is always raised, right? Somehow modern monetary theory is only ever applied when it's Wall Street. And for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure the same is true for Gavin, we've always been at war in this country. My earliest memory of politics is not, when the Twin Towers fell, but when I remember seeing Saddam Hussein hung for his what ultimately believed very, very little, if no involvement in 9/11. And since then, we've been at war in Iraq, Afghanistan. We've had shadow wars in Africa, all throughout the Middle East. And that has cost this country trillions of taxpayer dollars. We haven't seen any return on it. And I think, how are we going to rein that in, protect our troops, and stop pumping, tax dollars to the war profiteers so that we can reinvest it in our own communities using the proposals that you've kind of outlined?
Well, part of it comes back to campaign finance reform. You want to talk war. I think we need to, this is a stance I haven't heard any other candidates willing to take. But we need to comply with the international criminal courts. Right now, the international criminal courts almost exclusively try people from the continent of Africa for war crimes because other nations don't want to comply. If the United States isn't an ethical and moral leader, then we're tyrannical. And so a president shouldn't feel insulated, or a member of Congress shouldn't feel insulated from the far more wide-reaching effects of the decisions they make. If you approve torture, I don't just want to see some staff sergeant or some private first class getting penalized for it. You got to go up to the top. You got to hold people accountable. If you couldn't make it through the Nuremberg trial standards, then you don't deserve to continue to stay free or to lead a country.
To add to that, I suppose, Noam Chomsky famously said that every U.S. president would be indicted for war crimes if the Nuremberg standard was put into place. Now, as we, as you say that, how will we, oversee our presidents who have, routinely neglected to prosecute their predecessors so that they themselves continue the precedent of not being prosecuted? You'll see that Obama, he didn't prosecute any of the George Bush administration for their blatant war crimes that were committed throughout the number of black sites. There's a question as to whether or not Barack Obama's airstrikes were justified or considered war crimes, especially some of the shadow involvement. How I don't even want to get into Donald Trump, but how do we regulate that? How do we oversee that when our executive branch is seemingly so corrupt and blazing in public? We know they've committed these crimes, these atrocities, but we seemingly are without any option to take action. Trump was impeached for business dealings with Ukraine, not because he overrode weapons, a vote against Congress and sent weapons to commit genocide in Yemen.
We've got to demand better. And it's not just electoral politics. I mean, I'm stepping up because I think most working class people are a better fit for representing their communities than most of the people who currently represent our communities, and are really just there because they're better fundraisers, more well-connected, they come from money or power. We have to demand better. We have to be asking these questions at public forums, getting involved in politics. Fact is, the NRA doesn't have a ton of members, but every time they send out a donation ask email from their people, folks just throw money at it because their voters are coordinated. Their support is deep. We need deep, reliable support for justice and morality and ethics. And how do we build it? We build a movement. You talk to enough people. I think at least a few people have gotten on board for this stuff and gotten to share interesting ideas, and we're doing that right now. So, and then other than that, take to the streets, demonstrate, make your voices heard that way. That's how we do it, though. It's not going to be easy. It's not a simple answer. It's a war in its own way. It's a war in the minds of Americans and in the ballot boxes and at every single office up and down ballot.
Yeah, and when it comes to like kind of the, you could say the deep state, the establishment is kind of infringing on these rights. We're also seeing a lot of rise on censorship on social medias, Twitter, YouTube, and not to mention, of course, the nationwide crackdown on protesters that's going on right now in the streets of America. If you were elected to Congress, what kind of legislation would you support or propose to protect the First Amendment, ensure that our free speech and right to protest is protected at all costs?
Well, one of my favorite things to say lately is the First Amendment doesn't have a bedtime. I think censorship on social media is important, but there's a more nuanced form of propaganda that's much more insidious. Censorship used to be the only thing to worry about with authoritarian governments, and now we have to worry about they don't just shoot the person who puts out the story they don't like and erase the story. No, they release 9 other news stories, all with some degree of truth, and people just don't know what to believe. There's astroturfing and just putting out more false information to confuse everyone. We're in a tough position here, but you know what? You don't fight for what's right because you know you're going to win. You fight for what's right for you, for your family, for your loved ones, for your community, for your nation, for humanity, for the planet, for the future. And so it's about speaking truth to power. And don't let the corrupt forces take control of the narrative. They're trying to take away our rights. Shout it from the rooftops.
On a legislative term, would you vote to reauthorize the Patriot Act if that were to come up to vote while you were in Congress? No.
End the Patriot Act. Audit the Fed too while you're at it. But the Patriot Act's massive infringement on our First, Second.
I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up. We want to be respectful of your time. Can you tell people where they can go to support you? So maybe we can get a little bit more attention from the DCC.
I mean, I don't know if I guess I shouldn't turn down support if they want to help out. But you can check out armitageforcongress.com, ARMITAGEFOR Congress.com.
Awesome.
And again, thank you so much for having me on.
We'd love having you. Thanks so much for coming on to chat with us.
Yeah, and once we're in our van, we'll be in Washington at some point. So if you're around, we'd love to talk to you again in the van or, social distancing.
In the van. No, in the van.
All right. Yeah. Well, we'll see you then. Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Take it easy, gents.